Okay, so we are gonna move forward with the lecture, which is Unit A, Chapter 8. But we're gonna come back to Lab 7. I want to make sure that you know how to do crash dump or memory dump assessment or analysis. And I have found a virus infected file for your memory evaluation for the lab 7. When we come back next week, we'll do lab 8, which is going to be in bulk extractor. I do have the lab set up for you already. I just want to make sure that we have all the proper knowledge for the objective of the course. So in the case that if you need to evaluate RAM, you know how, and then we will deal with email forensic next week as the lab. So, but we'll talk about it today. So today, we're gonna cover, the topic is gonna be how you're gonna be able to assess email. And this is a very common approach nowadays because you're gonna see that many three things that are indicator of threats or vulnerabilities are gonna be coming in via email. It is a way for the external traffic to get to us is via email outside of the downloads. So, as a person in cybersecurity, whether you're considering forensic or doing investigation for incident response, it's important that you know the methods and what you need to do. So, in digital evidence, a lot of the times we are going to take a look at the email headers, and that's going to be coming from the actual network environment. So our evaluation tools are going to give us the details from the headers, but then you can also use logs from the network and the system to be able to analyze your email. So the first question, it says, where can a digital investigator locate evidence relating to email investigation? Number one, when you're looking at that specific computer or device, you will have the destination version of the email. That means the received email version. You would also have information about the servers that are handling the email. As you know, when you send an email, right, not only just one server is going to have access to that email, your email is being sent to many servers. There will be in between servers and the servers that are from the source and the destination. So that means that all the middle systems from the time that you click send to the time that the email arrives at someone's mailbox, it's going to be able to give you some details for that. So when we look at the email, we want to see, right, who's handling the email and the device that's used to access the email. So if I'm using a tablet to open the email, I should be able to analyze that. Or if I'm using a smartphone, so your cell phone, your smartphone logs of your internet service provider. And in that case, you must obtain approval, permissions from your internet service provider. Now, in many companies, you would see that the email is housed on AWS or Azure. A lot of the times, if they're using Outlook, they would use Microsoft as a provider. Some company, they would use third party like Google, Gmail, right? You would see that it is a Gmail account, but it is a business Gmail account. Or their own .com, but through Azure or another organization. So that means that when you are accessing the content of the email, you have to acquire permission or approval from the service provider and the company. Now, when you are investigating email, unless it is criminal related, right? A lot of times we must have consent from the user. And if the user is part of a criminal activity, they lose their right in consent. But sometimes we would need to have court order in the case that it is impacting legally. So it's important that you have proper procedure because it becomes a breach of privacy if you don't have the proper procedures in place, right? Right. So on that system, we should be able to access the email. Now, let's come back to question 2 in a little bit. Okay, so that answer, you can find it on the first page of your notes. And then let's talk about some of the protocol. RFC stands for request for comment. You would see that RFC, there's documentation and guidelines on how you should investigate as far as forensic, right? So if you're handling email forensic, they have documentation or guidance on how you should approach it. And this is managed by the Internet Task Force, which is supplemented by our government. So RFC is basically request for comment documents the type of protocols that would also be used in communication like email. So your SMTP, right? Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, this has been around for a long time. This is used on mail servers. So if you're looking at like Exchange server, that is for Microsoft, or mail servers that would be related to other operating system platform, you would see that it uses SMTP. So if I'm here and I'm sending an email to you, I would have to, it will be transmitted from my system to multiple servers and then get it to the recipient. So we know that, right? And SMTP uses port 25. So when we investigate our email, we should be able to track, right, from the sender system and across the servers who are passing my email from source to destination. So for question 2, it says, what type of system uses SMTP? And we know that SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, is used by mail servers, right? Like I said, Microsoft, we refer to Microsoft Mail Server as Exchange Server. And it uses port 25. That's your common port number for SMTP. Now, the next protocol that's listed on your notes is going to be Post Office Protocol, POP3, version 3. And this protocol is used to access email mailbox on the client system. So this is how you're able to retrieve email for on inbox, like your Gmail account or live.com email or outlook.com email. And POP3 uses port number 110, 110. So Post Office Protocol version 3, right? It's been around for a long time, often referred to client email on the mailbox. For the mailbox, like web email, and when you log into your account, like your Gmail or your outlook.com, right, you would see that there would be option for you to access like inbox, outbox, junk mail, etc. Any question? So it's important for us to understand various protocol, right? Because when you're looking at email headers, it will tell you the type of protocol, the service that's being used, right? The middle systems that are handling your email, your mail servers, and their service. So that's important to know. And then also the originated system and then the recipient. A lot of times your email header would also contain subject line. And if you attach a file, right, like a picture or a video or some kind of embedded file also get added to the headers as well. Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
one question. We don't have a lab today?
We have lab 7 to redo
Today?
today. Yeah. Yeah, the lab 7, we stopped at step 10, but we're gonna redo that lab. I changed the due date.
So are we doing the whole thing or continue when we left off?
We're gonna have to start at the beginning. Yeah, because the virtual machine needs to be downloaded and start from the beginning. Okay, so POP 3 on page 1 going to page 2. So what you see is here are your servers, which is SMTP. And then when you open up your email, right, as a recipient, that's a POP version 3. Okay, so it gives you the procedure on how mails get created from the sender, pass through the servers, and then open up by the recipient. The next protocol is called the IMAP. This is Internet Message Access Protocol. Some of you already took networking classes and security classes. You probably heard of this before, right? So this protocol, its job is for inbox management for the client. So your messages are left on the server until you select to delete. Now most organization like Google or Yahoo or Live, right, Microsoft, they would allow you a certain size for your mailbox, and when you exceed that size, right, it will tell you that you should delete, and so make room for your email. But archive, they would keep your email on there as long as you have enough storage. Okay, IMAP is the newer version of POP. This is going to allow you to access, right, your email as an inbox from, where it was sent. Okay. Okay. So if you compare the difference between IMAP and POP3, Post Office protocol retrieves the content of the mailbox, and IMAP allows you to remotely access the mailbox. It's still gonna give you the inbox and the mailbox content, but it's really designed for you to access it from anywhere. So originally when we use POP3, we have to set that up where, I'm using my client mail as POP3, and I have to set up which server I'm accessing. So I need to put in my SMTP information for the server, for example, my server name or address, in order to retrieve the content of the mailbox. So it needs to go fetch it from the server. Whereas IMAP, I just need to log into my account and it should be able to load, right, my inbox, my drafts, all of those things. So currently you're using IMAP, where POP3 was probably maybe a decade or more ago, where you have to set some of the information up with POP3 and SMTP. Okay, any question?
Then I still need to see them for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you can still see 4 when we move to 5. So the next part of the notes talk about web-based email. So when you're using web-based email, which most of us have, and I think we fully transitioned in many organizations to a web-based environment. Almost all your app now to access, right? Like your email is through web application. So for example, when you sign into your student email, you would use outlook.com, and that's a web application. It check your authentication with the authentication server, verify your credential, and then load your email through the web application. So for web-based email, you know that all email remains on the server until you remove it. So regardless, right? Before, back in the day, we were able to, I can still use my Outlook application on my Windows PC, right? It's still gonna, whenever that I log into it, I have to authenticate through the application, which communicates with the server, and then it loads my email into the application, which is now temporarily would be able to, some of it is stored depending on whether I have files or not attached to the email to my local system. However, most of our email now is web-based, and know that because email is stored on the server, right? The user has to actually delete it. So if I select delete on my mailbox, right? Eventually that's gonna get placed into a delete folder, and then I have to empty the delete folder, very much like your recycle bin. So you cannot just, so if the server, if I don't empty my delete folder, the server would remain or retain my email in the delete folder. Okay. So the email typically remain on the server until the system deletes it. Why is this important for us? Because in the case that if you need to go in and find the deleted email message, which you will have to, right? At some point, in the next lab, we're going to take a look at that. And then we want to make sure that we can find that on the server. Now, if the user deletes it, it puts it on the delete folder. If they empty the deleted folder, that file, just similar to what you've seen with the recycle bin on the server itself, it's going to get relabeled and make that space available for your new data. Okay, so nothing gets deleted right away, and then sometime on the network environment we back up multiple times. So let's say that you delete your email tonight, but the backup was performed this afternoon. So in the prior backup, we can still be able to retrieve that deleted email, right? So things don't get deleted if it gets backed up, and then we can ask for permission to access it. So this is important, especially when you deal with investigation cases like fraudulent cases, or even malware, right? Things are coming in like ransom. What will happen is maybe it impacts the company today. So, but the email has arrived in the morning, and then what you can do is you can take a look at how it comes in, where it comes from, all of those things. So forensic is crucial if you apply to be like a security specialist when you do incident response, or an analyst that, you want to look at how the type of threats is impacting the organization. Okay. For 6, it says, what is the purpose of your message ID in a web-based email message? And there are components to your email message, such as message ID. Why is it important in a digital investigation? What type of information can you obtain in a message ID? So the message ID, as you see in the name, it is unique identification for every email that has been sent. So basically, it represents a value that is uniquely to that email. So for example, I can send 3 emails to the same person, but those 3 emails will have 3 unique message ID, right? So let's say that I send them every other second. That even that, right? We would have 3 unique values, one for each email. So that's how the system is able to distinguish the difference between the first email to the second email to the third email. And that means that for each of the unique ID, it tells you that there's no other email that is the same, even though it's coming from the same sender and it's received by the same person, right? So the system cannot mistakenly identify the email, even though there are multiple emails from the same sender. So every email that you receive, okay, has a unique message ID. Now, can there be a duplicate message ID? Only if there is an alteration. So if somebody purposely go in there and modify the message ID to be identical to another email, then in that case, you have a duplicate message ID. But know that by default, we will not have a duplicate message ID, no matter who sends it, when they send it, right? Simultaneously, you might be receiving 2 emails at the same time from 2 different people, and those emails have unique message ID. Also on there, it indicates your date and time. Your timestamp is very important. That's also part of the header. This is created and logged by the server. So when the server receives it, just like how you go and mail off an envelope or a shipment, right? You drop that off at the post office or at FedEx, at UPS, they put a label on it and they will put the time that they have received your package or your envelope. So the server, when you click send, when the server first receive your email before it pass forward, it has a timestamp. Okay. And then it adds its information to it. The server adds its information. So when you look at the header, you might have 4 or 5, right? Let's say that I use my Gmail account and I send an email to Gabriel, who has the Gmail account. So what will happen is the first server from Google is going to put a timestamp on it, and it's going to put its server information on it. Then when it passes to the next server, who is also a Google server, it's doing the same thing until it gets to the last server that has that handles the transmission to his mailbox, right? So you might be seeing like 4, 5, or 10 different servers, right? In between, it really depends on that particular service provider if you're looking at webmail, okay? On how many servers that they use to manage the email for their user accounts. Okay, so there's some information about here, right? I talked about how things get deleted. It goes into the trash or the deleted folder. Now, one thing right here says that if you have an email data set that's available for examination, you might find the content with the email encoded. How can you go through? So in a lot of the cases, right, when you're using forensic tool, it decode it for you. But manually, we have to decode the email header, okay? This is important for your project, so you need to know how to read this. A lot of times email header comes like this. It's difficult to read. When it's presented to you, right, it's gonna show things like return path, some ID information. You have to document it, right? It's gonna show you where it's coming from, who it's for, all the servers in between, you see, right? IP addresses, the timestamp that we talked about, right? So when the server receives it, it puts a timestamp and then it puts down who receives it. Okay. And then for which user ID, and then here's your message ID. And then another timestamp, right? And then eventually it will get to the mailbox of that recipient. So, and this is a smaller header. So when you look at the email header, it can be very large and you have to interpret it. You have to decode it. Okay. So here it gives you the breakdown on what that looks like. Now, in some cases, right, you do see that they can modify the actual email header or different things. You see this with malware, and sometimes you also see with spam accounts, the bots actually goes and it modifies it so that way it's not intercepted or blocked by other entity. So now the return path indicates that if you send it to an email that no longer exists, right, you get that little message saying that no, it cannot reach that specific account. That's the return path. Okay. Any question? Okay, so we talked about how we would look at the message ID, and then you saw a little bit of the header. So what kind of information can you see on the receive line of the email header, right? If you're looking at specifically at the receive lines of the email header, number one, you're going to have the network name or the domain name, like the .com, the .gov, right? .net. Also the user ID. So the user account is really tied to an ID number in the user account database. So when I create a user account, even though it has a name, for example, my name, it would then, the system would give it an identification number for that user account. It doesn't matter whether you're using like your full name at gmail.com, right? It still has an ID number. In the receive line, you also have server names or transfer agents. Those are systems that are passing your email from the sender to the recipient. So the middle systems. And then the IP addresses of those systems. So those are the public IP addresses of those servers. So let's just kind of make this into something that we can relate to in real life, right? You send an envelope in the post office and it would have where that's coming from, the city, right? So the network here, and then it's going to give you a number for that piece of mail. And then it would list all the post office in between from the sender city to the recipient city. So the servers are kind of like that, or the transfer agents. And then the zip code for those servers. So the IP addresses, the public IP addresses for those systems, right? So we really design communication to really represent us as human in real life. So you do see some procedures that are kind of similar to what you've seen in like a post office environment.
Is that the reason why, like, if someone sends an email, sometimes you might not get it till like 2 years later?
Well, the only time that you don't get it to 2 years later if it's scheduled for late, or it get lost in the drafts where it not click sent, but you should receive it instantly unless there's something that happens with the transfer agents in the middle, right? But your system should be instant.
Well,
Quote unquote instant, not real life instant, but you know, seconds later. And then if the server gets slowed down, let's say that if the transfer agents are down, right, like your post office are closed, you might get it a few days later. So if your transfer agents are down, you might get it an hour later or maybe the next day, but never months or years later, unless it's intended to be that way, right? Like if I schedule to be 2025 delivery in my mailbox, then that mail gets automated for that specific date. But only time that you get a little bit of delay is if the middle systems are down or delayed. Yeah. Or if the user accounts, if you don't log on to your user account for 2 years, you won't get it 2 years later, right? So it's really dependent on your access timeline also. Okay. All right. So in the return path, you saw that we would get like no, when it cannot reach the destination, but some of the information that is important for us to know that in the return path, it also contains virus scan information, spam scan information, and information about the servers. Okay. So in the case where you enable security on your mailbox, let's say your Gmail account, and that email, that piece of email, we want to make sure that we scan the attachment before we download, or the servers that are handling it, right? If you receive a malicious email, sometime that the system will notify you, right? The content of this email is malicious. You don't, it's been blocked, or you can click allow if you want to, right? So usually it presents you with an option or the decision. So the virus scan and the spam scan information is included in your return path. So if you're investigating a malware that's coming in from an email, we also want to look at this section to see if it actually pick up the malware as a content in the email. Or spam. So return path information, you can find that on page 4. Right? There's a little snippet of that. And then the next section is on email attachments. So it uses MIME or multi-purpose internet mail extension. This allows you to include the standard for accepting non-ASCII and also binary attachments and other type of files that you would see in email. Back in the day, long ago, before many of you were born, right? Email was just plain text, right? You couldn't add images or pictures or even attach a file to it. Because the way that we integrate MIME, we now are able to use just non-ASCII based type of content or encoding with your email. Okay. So the things that it tells you here is that if you're using Outlook, a lot of times, sometimes you have to use the actual email agent to be able to examine the certain type of email. But a lot of times, if you're just looking at content, I think a lot of the forensic tools should be able to, it should allow you to see text-based type of email. So let me move 8 down. Okay, so 9, it asks you to define MIME, which stands for multi-purpose internet mail extension. This is internet standard for allowing emails to accept text other than ASCII. So we're able to use like HTML-based email, right? You see the advertisement that comes into your email with colorful banners and text. That's non-ASCII. We're able to have attachments such as binary attachments. You can have multi-part message bodies. So your email looks nicer. It has content that makes sense or visibly appealing. I shouldn't say makes sense, but it is appealing. And then non-ASCII based header information. But it also gives you attachment content, encoding system information, the data type for the segment in the email, right? Like for example, when I'm looking at the email header information, I know that there is HTML content in the email. So there's, data type that would include it as the content. Or if I have an attachment. So if there's a JPEG or JPG file that's attached to the email, MIME allows you to do that. Okay. So as you use technology, right, like opening your email tonight or tomorrow, you can think about the technology that's integrated within it. The more you are familiar with the technology, a lot easier for you to understand how to investigate that technology. So when when you're looking at the email header a week from now, we want to be able to see and understand a little bit clearer on what kind of information are we presented by the software or the tool. So how can you approach email investigation? Let's say that you need to take a look at someone's email account and what kind of tools should you use? So number 10 asks you, how can you conduct a client email investigation? That's a little bit different than the server because the server contains everybody's email, right? Let's say that you have an individual, a person of interest for your case. Let's say that we want to see if this person has committed fraudulent activities based on the company's accusation, right? You are the investigator, the analyst for that company. So we want to approach it from a neutral standpoint, and we wanted to see their email account to see if they have inappropriate activity like data leak or, expose of private information or intellectual property of the company. There are many things that could be going on. So what kind of tool should we be using? So number 1, you should try to export the container that's used by that person and open it in the email client that is installed on your computer. So if I'm examining person X, right, Outlook account, I would export their email content or their inbox and all of their email client information into my system, right? And you can also grab this as an image. So I need to open it in Outlook so it makes sense. Okay. So if that person is using Outlook, I can use Microsoft Outlook application or Outlook Express. I think nowadays you see Outlook from Office 365. It's still an Outlook application, but it's web application. On Linux systems or Apple systems, sometimes they would use Thunderbird as an application to access email accounts. Now, the way that we're going to do this in Lab A is we are going to use a forensic tool that's going to examine their email account. So I think that having the forensic tool, it doesn't change, right, the content or the container that stores the email, and that's important to emphasize. When you are accessing their email as a container, you have to have the proper permission and authentication for their email. So let's say that the company suspected that someone is committing fraud. A lot of the time their IT or their network admin would hand you over some access privilege to that particular account for investigation. But remember what I said, legally, because of privacy requirement, right? We usually must have consent from that particular user. Now the company is able to get away with that because they own that particular email server, right? They have proper ownership over some of the work related email. Now, when it gets into personal email content, you have to have personal consent, period, right? If that person had committed crime and had been arrested in the United States, we consider that as they lose their rights. So based on that, you would get court order, or the court would allow you to access, and you have to get the permission from the service provider like Google for Gmail, right? Microsoft for Outlook, and so on. Or Apple for Apple email. iCloud, right? Your iCloud account. Okay, so the point in this is whatever the application that's used, right? To open it, you use the same application. But ideally, we should use forensic tools so that way it doesn't change the container state, right? We always consider that as priority because you don't want the attorney to accuse you of editing or, right, falsifying email as you are investigating their email account. So Outlook Express is kind of old. I think that Microsoft this year did away with Outlook. They really, I'm still using Outlook app on my PC. I think starting with Windows 11, Microsoft really want to push everything web front. So you would see Outlook from Office 365. But in the case, if you want to look at the installed application on that Windows PC, you can go to the user account, right? Like, so if that person is signed on as John Doe, right? It will be John Doe as a user, and then the app data under local, because that's to the local system. Outlook loads locally and store things in temporary files, right? So when you click download and you don't save it as into a you don't click save as into a location, it puts it onto the Outlook folder. So there might be things that you can find there that, they previously temporarily downloaded or viewed. So you can find some information in the local system on the app files, or the app directory, I should say. Now, Microsoft had gone through many different versions of how your mail is loaded with the operating system. So prior to Windows 10, Windows 7 lived with Windows Live Mail, right? Before there was live.com, and then Microsoft really integrated Windows Live Mail for Windows 7 PC. And these files, right, live in Windows Live Mail folder under Microsoft. So the transition is, if you compare this, right, to the Outlook, it's still the same path. It's under app data, under local Microsoft, but it's in a different folder name, right? For the Live Mail, it will be under Windows Live Mail. For Outlook, it will be under Outlook folder. Still the same path under the user account, app data, local Microsoft. And for the Windows Live Mail, you would see that it would have .eml file. And in these files, you would be able to find email address information, mailbox size, and some data or payload information.
I have a question about the Microsoft email stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So like, so right now, as right now, it's called Outlook, right?
Right.
Was it ever called like Hotmail or something like that before?
Hotmail was the web account. Yeah, so back in the day when Hotmail used to be very popular, if you want to set up your client access, you would use POP3, and then you would go to the internet and find the Hotmail server information. So you would set up the SMTP server information. Yeah, I can load the email into like an Outlook account. I can still do it now, right? You can link your Gmail and all your other mail into one email applications like Thunderbird or Outlook.
Oh, like, I've done that before, it's so complicated.
Yeah, and it can get very confusing, but some people they want one-stop application like that. So all of that is just a way that you can set that up. But no, like Hotmail was just a web email-based system that you can use, just like Yahoo or Live or a lot of the things like I think AOL still lives. They're down to like maybe a number of servers. They retired many of the servers, so I think some people still have AOL mail type of email. Um, that will probably be your parents or even grandparents' days. I previously had an AOL, but yeah, they when they turned over everything to Time Warner, who bought right the majority of the servers from AOL, and then eventually transitioned that to other companies. But and then they laid off all the AOL workers, or those people had left and moved on to other things.
Anyway. Like, cause like when we said like merging every email to like so it goes all in one. I'm like, I tried that, like, I was linking like a Outlook to a Gmail. I want everything to go to the Outlook, from the Gmail to the Outlook. For some reason, it's having to go the opposite direction.
Well, sometimes it also need to link back so that way it's because it still sends through Gmail. Like,
I'm like, I linked them both ways, but Gmail, it would only allow me to send them to Gmail, from the Outlook all the way to Gmail.
yeah, sometimes, the app integration is not always very cohesive because different companies design things differently. They have different vision on how their system should be used, right? Um, Instead of a universal vision. For 13, when you're using Thunderbird that belongs to Mozilla, Mozilla maintains Thunderbird Mail. The default path, you would see instead of the .eml file, which is for email in Microsoft for the old legacy live system, for the Mozilla, it uses the .mbox file. And the information for the .mbox file, it would contain account, mailbox information, and the service or the protocol that's used. And this path right here is actually, Windows system that has Thunderbird installed. I don't know a lot of people who use Thunderbird. I've seen some occasionally. Not a very popular application by choice. I think a lot of people have Windows PC would use Outlook for most part because the Outlook is just a more popular application in a business environment. Well, now they push everything through outlook.com, right? Even if you have live, it still goes through live, but then it pins back to some of their main server now service, Outlook. So under the app data, right? This is considered under roaming, which is kind of interesting because it treats this particular apps as a roaming app. Compared to what you see with the native app from Microsoft, which is treated as a local app instead of a roaming profile. right? We talked about local profile versus roaming profile, right? Which is kind of interesting how it treats Mozilla as a roaming profile.
And Mozilla, like Mozilla Firefox.
Yeah, Mozilla produced many things, including Firefox. Firefox is one of the popular product that you see, but Thunderbird belongs to Mozilla as well. Okay, 14. What must the investigator do to analyze web mail artifacts, right? You need to obtain the evidence from the artifacts. First thing, you need to look at or analyze temporary internet files or internet cache on that user system. That's important because webmail artifacts is considered temporary internet files. So if you obtain these artifacts, you should be able to get some information about the webmail. And temporary internet files cache contain what? It contain images, right? Like in the content, there might be pictures, through HTML content of the email. Sometimes you can also find text information or any component of a web page that the user have browse or visit because it is web mail, it is web application. So web content likely would be remain in these files. So you need to take a look at the temp internet files or the cache, right? And we know that a lot of things cache with cookies for web content. So cookies are going to give you more information about also the behavior, the activities, some of the content, even credential for web.
Is anything, so if you like went on Chrome, right, and you went like into that Intego tab, it's like anything that Intego tab gets saved at all.
Well, even if you set some privacy, your session still is saved. Unless you purposely delete everything when you close your browser. You know how I can clear my history when I close my browser. So in that case, it just make that space available, but I can still carve out your history though. You can do that. So when we delete things, things don't get deleted. We already know that in this class. So
Yeah, like I said, honestly, I set my thing so it doesn't lose, so it doesn't save anything.
right.
Like Intego tab versus normal tab, because especially on the phone, it takes like all that just takes storage.
But ultimately it just gives that storage back when you're done. It did save things temporarily, it cached it, but when you close the browser app, it just makes that space available again. So at that moment, let's say that if I use my phone, I close my tab, it's supposed to delete everything. I lose my phone a minute later, someone can go in and grab some information from my browsing history. Yes, because if they carve it, they can probably find it, right? So it's just interrogating the memory or the SD if your phone uses like micro SD with the old Android, right? I think all the new Android now don't use micro SD anymore because they sell internal storage. Okay, so let's talk about specific artifacts for different type of webmail. We already talked about live, right? If you're investigating Gmail, what should you gather as artifacts for Gmail? Number one, you need to look at internet cache, just like the last question. And other sources such as RAM, because things get placed onto RAM for temporary access, right? With processes. And then sometimes you can also examine page file for the user local storage. So page files are just virtual storage that gets added to the disk drive, right? Your solid state or your hard drive, and it treats it as memory, but it is on the hard disk or the SSD versus RAM. This is a way that we can supplement RAM, and we talked about that last week. So ultimately, you need to look at your internet cache, temporary location for internet files. And then we can look at RAM, and we can look at page file on the system. And when you are evaluating the artifacts, it's ideal to do keyword search, right, for that particular email addresses. So you have to customize your keyword list, right? Remember how we use autopsy? And when you're using forensic toolkit like autopsy or ProDiscover, or any of the ones that you see like FTK, it comes with a keyword search feature. All you have to do is making sure that you seek out that the targeted address or addresses, right? So you create a keyword list that contain the email address or the addresses of whatever that you're investigating, right? Or whoever that you're investigating. So next week we'll use bulk extractor. One of my favorites actually. I like autopsy that it is cross-platform, but I think bulk extractor does a better job in this area. Autopsy is decent. And if you like using ProDiscover, you can. So ultimately, if you're using 3-4 forensic toolkit and it produced the same evidence from the set of artifacts that you have validated your result, right? It's exactly the same 3 ways, 3 tools with the same procedure. Any question regarding Gmail? So anytime you use webmail, right, we start off with internet cache, and then we move into some area. Now, if you're looking at order of volatility, you should do this and this first, right? And then this last, because these are more temporary based on power usage. And then the page file, it is temporary, but it's not as volatile as the others. 16. The default path that stores for Chrome browser history, and this also changes with Chrome versions. But anyways, for Windows, if you install Chrome on Windows, the default path for cache history for email, there are 2. By default, when you install Chrome, and Chrome is tied with Gmail, right? Like when you log into your Google account, there's an option with the all apps where you can access your Gmail account. I think now you're required to, or in order to access a lot of resources, you have to authenticate. So it's under the user account, the app data, and it is local. Under the Google folder, under Chrome, and then user data, and then the default. Now, if you want to drill down on the history, the browser history, and I think it talks about favorites, or what is it called? Bookmark is in Chrome, right? Favorites is in Edge or Microsoft. You would also have like a directory called bookmark. Okay, but anyway, for the history, you can go to the history provider cache. Now, this is related to Windows 10 or 7 and later. And then the way that they design the OS is so with the changes, let's say that you have the newer version of Windows, the path might change. So, but you always want to look into the application data. right? Where that's stored. So I go to C drive, right? Look at the user folder and then go down to the layer of the folder and I will be able to see. You can try it on your home system and see. Now for Firefox, right? I know that people alternatively, if they don't use Chrome, they use Firefox. And then for those of you who use Mac, right? You guys use Safari. But for Firefox on Windows PC, you can get cache and history of the Firefox browser through similar path. You're gonna get to the local and then you get into Mozilla, then Firefox, and it's stored under the profiles and cache too. So Firefox, right, also depending on the settings, Firefox would store in the cache too. It would store internet history and the profile cache. So the user profile cache really means what? The page that they bookmarked, things that they saved, you know, cookies information. Any question? So there will be some various questions on the next quiz and also final exam on some of these locations, but just think about the logical sense in how the path is. For the majority of the app, it's under app data, local, and then the app name, and then it's subfolder. Like in Chrome, it's under user data. In Firefox, it's under Mozilla, right? So you do see slight difference between one browser to the next. $15 should say do. Sorry, I got a grammatical error there. Any question?
I think if I take all your classes again, every one of them, I'll be an excellent student.
That's good.
But right
But
now,
you always have my YouTube video channel.
yeah, you know
right?
what? You're right.
You don't have to take it all over again. You just go back and watch that lecture
Yeah.
or
that's-
the
that's
set of
so cool.
lectures.
That is nice. You have a lot of subscribers too. That's cool.
Yeah, I think free security sessions or education is highly demanded by a lot of people around the world. So
I don't think people really understand what the value of you doing it, putting it on there. Cause they just think it's just another person.
right.
They don't realize that you're actually teaching stuff.
Yeah. And I think, it's, if you're interested in this and you want to find out what it is, maybe watch a lesson and kind of have a feel for what it is, right? It's a good way to test something and trying to learn something.
It's valuable information. Thank you.
Yeah. But my disclosure is this is for informational, educational purposes only. I don't teach people to hack, right? We ethically hack, so I see. So a lot of tutorials that you see nowadays online about security, they kind of talk about the concept. They show you the screenshot of the results, but they don't really teach you on how to get there, right? It's really difficult for someone to really learn something carefully, and understand how it works if you don't. It's kind of like telling you, okay, here's a wheel, here's a car, and the result is you drive down the street, but it doesn't really teach you how to drive how to steer the wheel or how to put things gear into or shift your gear or, you know, apply your brakes and things like that, right? So I see a lot of content like that online. Maybe people don't want to have the liability in teaching risky things like this, but you know, knowledge is power. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll move this down a little bit so we can see the last part. 18. It asks you, what is the best approach for email forensic investigation? Ideally, we have to access the property or the service provider's property that contains the email. So it's ideal that we would have some legal order, right? Like court order to get the content from the service provider. That can also take time. Again, like I said, consent from the individual, right, is ideal. Written consent with witness, okay? People, you know, tell you, once you tell them, I know how to do this, right? They will be like, can you look into so and so and whatnot, right? We want to make sure that we have proper written consent with witness, sign and witness. That's really important. And you know, the verbiage, you make sure that the liability behind this can be a lot, right? We want to make sure that we are not accounted for things that not intended. So making sure that we're safe and ethical in our practices. And then if you really want to do the red team area, right, that's really ethical hacking area. You do have to do some forensic in that area. And that's a little different game. So the rule of engagement, you know, authorization to ethically hack, it's also required, right? We don't go around that. When you go around that, that becomes criminal activity, and you don't want to be live in prison with, and even with parole, no access to the computing system. As you know, nowadays, that's probably hard to live. Not getting a job, not able to, you know, even apply for services without a computer is difficult. Okay. Like healthcare. Any questions? Okay, so not too bad. Like I said, so next week we're gonna do lab using bulk extractor on Windows system. I'm probably gonna cut it down. I might not do the Enron case because it's too old and you guys might not know who that is or what that is. We will do a different case, maybe a second case in that particular lab, so we have enough time. And then the following session, the 30th, will be no class. I will give you some light work to do outside, because I have a meeting, and then we'll come back on the 6th to have another lab, and then we'll go for Thanksgiving break after that. And then we'll come back, and by that time I can talk about your project on what you're going to be doing. So on the 6th, so we'll see how it's gonna go, but I think I wanted to add a second analysis to this particular lab exercises. Okay, all right, let's stop recording. And then let's take a break.